All right, I'm recording now. So, um, this is kind of a mysterious area for a lot of people, and even a lot of people who know about herbal medicine kind of get this wrong or misunderstand the situation with this. But there are some rules about what you can say on the label, or in general, what you can say about um, an herbal product. And it used to be that you couldn't really say much of anything about them. You know, back in the 80s, early 90s, back when I started practicing, if somebody was selling an herbal product, really all they could say was what it was. You know, you could have a box of dandelion tea and have it say dandelion tea on it, but you couldn't say anything about what it did. Or it was considered to be equivalent to selling it as a drug. And actually, it's possible to sell dandelion tea as a drug because there are pharmaceutical standards for dandelion tea from way back in the old times, but it would be sort of not very cost effective as far as dealing with the regulatory situation to do that. So nobody does. Let's see, to rewind a little bit. 100 years ago, there weren't really a lot of rules about what could go in medicines of any sort. And so people sold all sorts of things and made all sorts of claims for them that were not always true. And those claims extended to what you could expect the remedy to do, as well as what was in it. So there would be things that, you know, claimed to contain certain herbs that weren't actually in them, or were secret formulas, and were, you know, for which all sorts of claims were made without there being any real proof of those claims, or any real anything to back it up other than marketing. And in the 1920s, a law came out called the Food, Drug, and Cosmetics Act, basically saying that you had to use approved products to make your foods, drugs, and cosmetics, and that you also had to label them honestly about what was in them. And that law got added to the set of regulations around that topic, got added to over the years. And in the late 80s or early 90s, there was some updates to what sort of nutritional information you had to have on stuff, calories, fat, sugars, things like that. And then in 1994, they came out with a law called the Dietary Supplements Health and Education Act. And I know I've kind of talked about this a little bit before, but under this law, this law really kind of allowed the herbal industry to exist as a business, the herbal products industry to exist in a very cohesive way. There were herbal products for sale before, but it was kind of a legal gray area, and there was not a lot that you could necessarily say legally to promote them. So this law made it possible to make certain claims for herbal supplements. And because this is an FDA thing, because this the Dietary Supplements Health and Education Act is a statute, it's a law, but there are a lot of FDA regulations, and a lot of the interpretation and implementation of it is through the FDA. So it basically is a federal thing that mostly only applies to stuff being sold in interstate commerce inside the United States. Now, a lot of people will label according to these things because it's especially these days, you know, people will sell their stuff on Instagram or Etsy or whatever, and there will be a lot of interstate commerce. You know, it's not like most people are just selling things locally these days. But theoretically, you could and not have this law come into effect. But The law makes it legal for people to make claims that are not disease claims, but are about how an herb, or not just an herb, this also applies to vitamins and minerals and some other things, but how this category that it created is called dietary supplements, and it includes vitamins, minerals, and herbs. You can talk about what it does structurally and functionally in the body, as long as it doesn't amount to a disease claim, as long as it's not considered the equivalent of a disease claim or actually has anything to do with saying the name of an actual named disease. So you can't say that something fights the flu, for instance. You can say that it supports the immune system. Blood pressure is a structural and functional thing, but you can't say that something is reduces blood pressure, because hypertension is a disease entity that consists only of blood pressure. That's the only defining characteristic of it, regardless of what its underlying cause is. So you really can't say that something lowers the blood pressure. You can say that it supports the kidneys. You can say some other things that are about what it does, how it works on the blood pressure, essentially. But you really have to avoid anything that is or could easily be interpreted as a claim to treat, cure, or prevent a disease. So you can't say something prevents a disease, you can't say it cures a disease, and you can't say it treats a disease. Cure and treat are basically the same thing. I mean, other than the fact that treat might not be as final as cure, but really cure is not so much well, I don't know, it's sort of a nebulous concept in some ways, but that's another philosophical discussion entirely, I suppose. But the idea is that you can make structural and functional claims as long as they don't contain the name of a disease and don't have or any recognizable part of the name of a disease, and they don't have any anything about them that makes it obvious that they're for a disease, nothing that describes a disease, for instance. So it all has to be all about structures and functions in the body being supported, regulated, increased, decreased, that sort of thing. So that is really crucial. That's a really crucial piece of understanding for what you can and can't say about any products you might make for human consumption. And some of you may know about this, but there was an herbalist here a few years ago who went to prison for making some disease claims on a product that he was making. And I met with him a few times. He had warnings. They told him, you can't say this about it. And I tried to convince him to change what he was saying about it so that it would be in the form of a structure function claim, and or to not sell it in interstate commerce, because he was really only selling it at one place outside of Kentucky. But he wouldn't do either of those things. And the local sheriff kind of gave him bad advice and told him that the feds didn't have any authority unless the sheriff approved it. And if the sheriff, basically that he could protect him from getting arrested by federal authorities, which was not true at all. And so the guy ended up defending himself, representing himself in court, and his defense completely missed the point. He had all these people coming in talking about how great his products were, how much they helped them, and things of that sort. But that really wasn't what he was being. That really wasn't why he was in trouble. Not exactly. I mean, he was in trouble because he made claims that weren't what the people with the arrest power said that he could make. And as unfair as that may be, it is pretty predictable, at least, that things went the way they did. So he ended up getting sentenced to 6 years and serving 4. And it was a very unnecessary, terrible situation, terrible waste. Could have easily gone a different direction. but he didn't listen to me. And he got bad advice from somebody that was, kind of based in a conspiracy theory mindset that didn't really bear out in the real world. And he believed that person because they were someone who should have known. But anyway, it's very important. There are people who will come after you if you do this wrong, even if it's on a fairly small scale, possibly, if you draw their notice. So there are certain pieces of information that are required to be on a label. And I'm going to show you a label. This is just a tincture bottle here. And I'm going to show you some of what is on it and talk about what it all means. So this is a bottle of the herb ashwagandha in tincture form. And underneath ashwagandha, so it has the name of the herb prominently displayed there. This is only a single herbal ingredient. It has also some alcohol and water in with it. But on here it says ashwagandha, and then it says Withania somnifera. So it has to have both the commercial name, and this is important. Herbs have specific names that they're known by in commerce. So ashwagandha has a variety of other names besides ashwagandha, but it has to be called ashwagandha when it's sold on a product label. It has to be called ashwagandha. Also has to have the Latin binomial there. So underneath ashwagandha, it says energy and vitality. So that's what they're making. That's the claim that they're making, that this gives you energy and vitality. So, you can see that that's nothing to do with any sort of disease or anything like that. It's about something normal and how it promotes something normal. And so that's their structure and function claim for this thing. And next to where it says energy and vitality, I don't know if you can see it, but there's an asterisk. And the text that the asterisk leads to is in a box on the other side of it. And it says, this statement has not been evaluated by the FDA. This product is not intended to diagnose, treat, cure, or prevent any disease. So that wording has to be on any supplement that makes any kind of claim. Just like that, those exact words in a little box has to be on the label somewhere for it to be a legal dietary supplement label. And when I'm dispensing things from my clinic, I don't always have all this information on them. Sometimes it just, I'm giving it directly to a person that I'm working with under direct consultation. I'm not selling it across state lines. I'm not really even selling it. I'm, making it for the person and charging them for my labor, but it's not, it's not like I have a packaged product that I'm giving to them off of the shelf. So it has, what are those exact words? Those exact words are, and I'm going to try and see if I can get them to go into the box as well. No, I can't do voice to text right now. Okay. The exact words are, this statement has not been evaluated by the FDA. They don't evaluate this kind of statement at all. So it's generally the case that this statement has not been evaluated. This statement has not been evaluated by the FDA. This product is not intended to diagnose, treat, cure, or prevent any disease. And you'll see that on just about any herbal supplement label that you find, unless it just doesn't make any claim for what it's for. And so then this one has also got some optional stuff on it, like an organic USDA organic label that doesn't have to be there, but it is in this case. It also says that it's gluten-free, which you don't have to say that it's gluten-free, but if you say it's gluten-free, it really has to be gluten-free, or else you're definitely making a claim that could be dangerous and could be you could be held accountable for. So besides the name and the structure function claim, it has the name of the manufacturer, Herb Farm, with a PH. And then on the back, it has their name, address, phone number, and website, all back here. It doesn't really have to have their phone number and website, but in this case, it does. It does have to have their address. It has to have the manufacturer's name and their address, the name of what the product is, and then any structure function claim with that asterisk and that boxed statement. And then in addition to that, it has a supplement facts panel. And I'm going to show you, I'm going to share content of a kind of a sample supplement facts label. So this is sort of a, this is an example from the FDA's website. Supplement facts, the word supplement facts, and then this kind of box like this, the number of calories that would be in it, the serving size, how many servings per container, then calories, carbohydrates, sugars, including added sugars, and then here we have the statement, proprietary blend, 0.7 grams. And which is German chamomile and hyssop is the blend in this. And you have these little crosses here, meaning that there's not a % daily value established. So if it was a vitamin, like vitamin C, there is a recommended daily intake of vitamin C, and it would say what percentage of that recommended daily intake it was, as well as the amount of it. So with this, daily value is not established. Here with the carbohydrates and sugars, there is a daily value established, and it's a % based on a 2,000 calorie diet, which is very standard on any sort of nutrition facts or supplement facts labels. And then down at the bottom, it has other ingredients. These are not the things that are supposed to make it do what it does, but they're in there to add texture, flavor, anything like that. So fructose, lactose, starch, and stearic acid in this imaginary product. Typically, stearic acid is something that is used to bind tablets together. Fructose and lactose can be binders or fillers, or they can be flavoring. They're slightly sweet. So all of this is the sort of thing that would be on a supplement label. The supplement facts panel is required to be on there somewhere if there's any kind of claims being made about it. Just a second. Is there any worry with making these products in a home kitchen? I'll get to that in a minute. That is kind of basically an overview of what the supplement label needs to look like. And the most important part about that is you don't want to be making structure and function claims. So with, and this is also important, the FDA considers labeling to be anything that you say about it, not just what's on the physical label. So if you have brochures, if you have stuff on your website, it has to adhere to that same kind of rule. It doesn't, you can't, just because it's not on the label, you can't make other claims about it. You know, you can, somebody who doesn't sell it can say whatever they want about it. But if you're selling it, they're going to consider anything you say about it to be labeling, part of your labeling of what it's for. And they will, that's generally speaking, that's how they notice when somebody is doing something they don't like, is that they make a public statement, a claim on the label, or a claim on a website or something like that about a product. And people do this all the time without getting noticed. Lots and lots of people are on Instagram talking about how their sea moss gel treats erectile dysfunction or whatever they're trying to claim that it does, making claims that would not really fall into this category. Generally speaking, people get away with it. So I'm not telling you what I'm telling you to say that you would never get away with doing anything otherwise. Probably you would, but it's important. If you're going to break the rules, it's important to know what the rules are so that you know that you're breaking them. But generally speaking, that can be a very costly thing to do. Typically, if you get caught doing that, to begin with, all they're going to do is send you a letter telling you to stop. If you ignore that, then you're breaking the law. If you get told to stop and then you stop, I'm not aware of any cases where somebody has done that and gotten into any further trouble from it. And I think it would be pretty hard for them to do anything with that. I think that if you if you ignore what they tell you to do, then they're going to say, okay, you ignored this warning, and that's grounds for prosecution or further action or whatever. But if you just and you can go on the FDA's website and look at letters that they've sent to manufacturers. They publish these; they're a matter of public record when they happen. So you can go and look at them, and they are generally they'll say something like, you said this and this about your product. We consider that to be a disease claim. You need to stop and show us that you have changed this. Or, you could take them to court and say, no, I don't think this is a disease claim, and here's why. You could fight it. But, you better have lots of money and lawyers, because they do. So that's just kind of a reality of doing business in the current regulatory environment. Yes, you can Google FDA warning letters about herbs, and you can find they kind of keep a bulletin up of who they've sent them to recently and all sorts of things. And you can find some really good examples by reading those of the sorts of stuff they don't like and the sorts of stuff that that they will come after, because that kind of gives you a better idea of where the boundaries are. Over the years, I've seen a lot of people try to circumvent this through silliness, like misspelling something, like spelling flu as FLEW, but it was clear from the context that this was something for respiratory infections and things like that. So they don't care that you spelled it wrong. It's not really about that. It's about whether it's recognizable. One example from many years ago was something that was sort of they weren't saying what it was for, but they called it PC spes. Spes is like Latin for hope, and it was kind of being marketed or being talked up supposedly by third-party users on the internet as being a thing for prostate cancer. And they kind of sent a warning letter saying that it was that PC was a recognizable reference to prostate cancer, which is kind of a stretch. But then I never really got to find out how that turned out, because the product they ended up finding out that the product was adulterated with drugs. It was not actually an herbal compound, although the manufacturers might have not known that. They were getting some of their supplies from a third party. They weren't sourcing the herbs themselves, so they were putting something in it that they may have believed was actually an herbal extract, but was in fact a drug called diethylstilbestrol, which is not an uncomplicated substance. It's a substance with some pretty horrific side effects, mostly on unborn, mostly on fetuses, which is not necessarily an issue for the people who would be taking it for prostate cancer. But it is a very powerful substance, regardless of that. So with the wording, oh, sorry. So would the wording antiviral not be allowed? No. So if you were putting something in interstate commerce with the wording antiviral on it, that would be probably frowned upon. That would, even though that's not specifically a name of a disease, they would consider that to be a reference to a pathogen. And like I said, it would be possible to fight that, but I don't think that, I think that you would probably not get a fair deal if you tried to. Um, but you can say that it's, helps support the immune system. And you might even be able to talk about specific things that it does in the immune system. Certainly a lot of herbal supplements do talk about certain effects that they have on the immune system. So it is possible to talk about that. But yeah, directly saying antiviral is pretty likely to get them to well, it's something that they probably would not let fly if they noticed it. Could you say immune and respiratory support? So you could probably do that. They have been sort of historically, they have sort of been unreasonably restrictive with anything to do with the respiratory system. So it's that is kind of an area that they've kind of gone after people in ways that I don't think are necessarily very reasonable when they talk about the respiratory system at all. But you could say immune support for sure. And if you just said respiratory support, I'm not sure what would happen there. But that certainly does sound like a structure and function claim rather than a disease claim. But they would also take into context anything else that you might have said about what it does. So there is the possibility that they would be unduly restrictive. So
what about, so sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
Go ahead.
What about so if you're trying to say something like that, but you don't want to use the word respiratory because it's frowned upon, would you say helps support healthy airway or lungs? Or, I mean, how would you get around that?
I'm not sure that any of those things would be much better than any other.
It's such a crock.
Yeah, it can be pretty unfairly restrictive. I might talk about, if it were me, I might talk about what it does for the respiratory system. Maybe it kind of depends on what I was trying to say, or I might just not. But
so for example, if you have something that kind of like thins your mucus secretions, can you say that?
I mean, again, that sounds like a structure and function claim to me, but they really have been kind of unfair about respiratory system stuff. So I can't promise that it would go okay, but you could definitely say it. And if they told you to stop, then you would probably have to make other plans. I mean,
well,
and that's
there's too
from
much
a
money to be
business
made.
Perspective. Yeah. From a business perspective, it might work out better to, make the claim you want to make and then change it if you're told you have to change it. But
take the gamble.
Yeah, but like I said, generally speaking, they are kind of the bad part is that they are sort of unduly restrictive, or they take a very, very broad interpretation of what they consider to be a disease claim. But on the plus side, it's not something that they're going to show up and arrest you for immediately or anything like that. They're going to send you a letter saying you have to change it.
Okay.
So, I can't really promise that any specific claim will fly. A lot of it is open to interpretation, and they do like to take an interpretation that is very, very broad of what they consider a disease claim.
I mean, I have no plans of selling things at any point. I'm just giving things away at this point, but it's good to know, like,
it's good to know.
If I wanted to.
Yeah, it is important to know. So then there was a question about your manufacturing facilities. Can you make these in your kitchen at home? And practically speaking, the answer is that a lot of people do. And there are a set of rules called good manufacturing practices that that manufacturers are supposed to be compliant with. And they're pretty extensive and involved. And you can find more guidance about them on the FDA's website, because they publish a guidance that's for small business entities. But basically, the upshot of it, the general gist of it, is that you have to keep records of every batch of everything you made, of exactly what the measurements were of the different things that went into them, and you have to keep samples of every batch that you make in case something were to happen. Most herbal manufacturers that are small scale, that are like single people making herbs and selling them and that sort of thing, or just a couple of people, most of them are not GMP compliant. Most of them are not necessarily doing all of this. And the FDA, when they passed these rules, said they would exercise discretion as far as not doing this in a way that's going to shut down every traditional healer in the country or anything like that. But they can be kind of capricious as far as that goes. So it's always possible that they'll show up and say, okay, you need to be good manufacturing practice compliant, and then you would have to at least try to become so if you wanted to keep doing it. But for the most part, if you're just if you're dispensing things to people that you worked with, that you consulted with directly, they're really not coming after people like that. If you're selling things, it's possible that they could, but so far they don't for a lot of people. And I know that's kind of an unsatisfactory answer, but again, this is all about people putting things in interstate commerce too. And it's not necessarily something that they're going to, if you're just, making things locally and delivering them locally, not something they're going to bother with, generally speaking. So that is all out there. But practically speaking, yeah, you can make things at home. Here in Kentucky, we have like cottage manufacturing laws for food. It's kind of somewhat open to interpretation whether those would apply to tinctures or whatever. But one could at least argue that they did. So, it's kind of, there aren't a lot of specific local laws that talk about that sort of thing. There might be in some other places. And there are in some other places, and in some of them, they might be kind of restrictive. That being said, I've talked to people who have tried to sell herbs at the farmer's market in Berea and been told by the people who run the Berea farmer's market that, no, you can't do that. It's against the law. And, they don't really have a statute that they're citing or anything like that. It's just kind of their legal opinion, but it's one that they've held for a while. And, that some other people have looked at and said, well, Berea Farmers Market considers it this way, so we should probably do it that way too. And that's just in terms of people like trying to have a booth where they sell tinctures. But other places don't feel that way about it. And so it's not necessarily, set in stone or anything. Nor has it necessarily been, like, as far as I know, become a matter of case law where it's been taken in front of a judge and argued. Nor do I plan to be the one to do that with it. Try to avoid that sort of thing at all costs, because there's really not much you can gain from it. But at least not for me. For some other people, that might be different, feel different. But I try to avoid that type of situation. Now, with everything I've said so far, all of this applies to things that are consumable, things that are dietary supplements. And in order to be a dietary supplement, something has to be something that you consume by mouth. So if you have a salve or something like that that's for topical use, lip balm, anything like that, that's not really a dietary supplement. And the rules for being able to make structure and function claims that you have for dietary supplements don't exist for salves. Pretty much anything health related that you're considering a salve to do might be considered a drug claim. So, with salves, when I make salves, I don't really sell things in a context that where that would matter. In the brief part of my career where I tried to, I just kind of said that it was a salve and what was in it and left it at that. You can look at other products that are out there and kind of see the sort of things that they claim, which are mostly to do with moisturizing and things like that. And that sort of thing is generally okay. But soaps, you can't really, say that the soap is for something very easily, or salves, anything topical. The dietary supplement rules don't specifically apply to it. And they're kind of a legal gray area. When I try to look into what actually these things are considered, maybe cosmetics, but they really don't fit the definition of cosmetics either. So, you could definitely label them as drugs. But like I said, with any kind of labeling something as a drug, that requires that you be registered with the FDA as a drug labeler. And that's a whole other thing that would probably involve, more that you would have to have certain types of facilities and that you would have to have them inspected and things like that. So it is possible to label some herbs as drugs if they are what the FDA would call old drugs, meaning that they were already being marketed for what you're marketing them for prior to the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act of 1927, I think it was. So there are a lot of things like that. If there's a book that was called The American Herbal Pharmacopoeia, and there was another one called the National Formulary. Both of those listed all sorts of different medicines. And if something was official in either of those pharmacopoeias, then it's at least theoretically possible to label it as a drug in the United States. And sometimes you will see things that are labeled as drugs that do contain just plant products, like oil of wintergreen or menthol, which is mint essential oil. It's a substance in mint essential oil, but actual mint essential oil fits the national formularies, or fits one of their definitions. I can't remember which one it's in. It might be in both of them, but it's possible to label some things like that as drugs, and there are some manufacturers that are already set up to do that sort of thing. But it's not a very common choice, and it wouldn't make a lot of business sense, and it certainly wouldn't make a lot of business sense or any business sense at all for a small entity like an individual or a small family business to try and label things like that. So for the most part, if you're making topical things, it's best to just say what's in them. And if you're making something more extensive that's for internal use, you can make the structure function claims with the appropriate caveats and all that. And that's kind of how you have to do it, especially if you're doing things at any kind of large scale. Like I said, if it's just something that you're doing on a really small scale, it's probably not going to attract any notice, probably not going to even attract as much notice as you want it to. It's hard to get people to pay any attention to that sort of thing. But if you are doing anything controversial, if you've got a big following on social media, if you've got a business that's moving a lot of units, a lot of bottles of whatever it is, then you are definitely going to have to be careful about that sort of thing. Now, this business right here, Herb Farm, they've been around for quite a while, and it really started out just as small as anything else. As this guy named Ed Smith, and he started making these herbal products at a time when there weren't a lot of them on the market, and it kind of became one of the first brands that was widely sold. And at the time, it was better than anything else that was widely sold. as far as, something where you could go into a health food store and get a bottle of tincture. He's retired now, and at least before the pandemic, he was living in Thailand with his wife, but I don't know if he still is or not. But made a bunch of money, made a whole bunch of money just by kind of getting into the market at the right time, and making a solid product. It was simple stuff. For the most part, it's just, they do have some blends, but most of their products are just just like that, an herb like ashwagandha that they buy and make into tincture and bottle and resell. So my career has mostly been about clinical work. It's mostly been about working directly one-on-one with people, making medicines that are specifically for those people. Not everybody does that. Not everybody does it the way I do it. And so some people, make a significant amount of their income by just kind of selling products that they've made directly to consumers without necessarily talking to them, just having them up on a website or getting them in stores or whatever and having people buy them. And, so if you do that, it's important to know what the rules are, and not necessarily, like I said, doesn't necessarily mean you have to follow the rules all the time, but it's really important to know what they are so that you can understand your level of risk that you're taking. Just like with anything else. All right. Any questions about all of that? Yeah.
I have a question. I'm sorry. So I had always thought it would be really cool. Those little free little libraries?
Yeah.
I always thought it would be really cool to make remedies for common things and have like a free little library, except it be free little remedy kind of situation.
Right.
So I
That's a
don't
fun
even know.
idea.
Yeah, but I didn't know how I would, do that without getting into trouble. But if I kind of follow the same labeling things, people aren't really going to know what things are used for. So I don't know. I don't know how I would go about doing that, but that was kind of something I wanted to do
Mhm.
for my second little project, but I just didn't know how to go about doing that.
Yeah, that's an interesting idea. I mean, if you're not selling them, I don't think that I'm not sure any of these rules specifically would apply if you were not also selling them. Because they are about things being in interstate commerce, which does imply that they're being sold. So, if you're making traditional remedies and giving them away, at least under Kentucky state law, you're pretty safe. And that's of course not going to be a federal thing necessarily. Yeah, I think that it would be important to be able to talk about what you can expect from it. But for example, if you have something like chamomile and you say it promotes restful sleep, then that's exactly what it does. It's not necessarily any more vague or anything like that. And I don't think they necessarily have to be vague. They just kind of have to be about how they work instead of them being for something that's like a specific disease, which that's kind of a newer idea. Like in, well, I don't know about new, but I think that up until about the 1600s or so, the dominant paradigm in a lot of Europe and Northern Africa and Southwest Asia, which for medical purposes have been kind of a contiguous region for a long time. In that area and in those medical traditions, a lot of the time people talked about things being, for a particular part of the body. And then people started sort of coming up with, and this is an idea that had been around before, but the dominant idea started being around this time that people started switching over to single substance remedies like mercury and sulfur and things like that, rather than the older plant remedies that contained a lot of different substances together. People started talking about what they called sovereign remedies, meaning that something was essentially for a particular thing, like it was put on this earth as the cure for a specific disease. And this idea that, for every disease that God created, he also created a remedy. And that applied to plants as well as to minerals and things like that. And so that kind of became the dominant way of thinking. And then hundreds of years later, when they started coming up with rules for drugs, they were thinking in terms of that paradigm. And so that's still what they have to have, is a disease entity that a drug is for. One weird example from fairly modern times, 20 years ago or so, was that some people realized that premenstrual difficulties could be relieved in some people by giving them Prozac. And they couldn't make a drug that was for that because it wasn't considered a disease. So they wrote papers defining a new disease that they called premenstrual dysphoric disorder, which they might have previously called PMS or something like that. But they defined a new disease so that they could market a drug for that disease explicitly. So there's kind of like this concept of things having to be for a specific disease, and that being how people think of remedies. And I think that a lot of the time, if you can think of them in terms of structure and function, you actually get a clearer picture of what they're going to do and how they're going to help. So all that is to say that I think that just because you have to make structure function claims rather than disease claims doesn't necessarily mean you have to leave people less informed about what to expect from a remedy than if you were making disease claims. It's just you have to talk about it differently.
Thank you so much.
And again, with something like that, where you're not talking directly to the person, brochures might be a reasonable and cost-effective way to educate people a little bit about the thing in a format that would not fit on this 2-inch by 4-inch label. So that's something to consider in that context.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Yeah.
I'm liable to do it and then nobody even take anything, but at least it's there.
Right. Yeah. It's I think it's a neat idea for a project. It's kind of hard to say how well it'll be received. I've done something kind of similar with there's an organization called Food Not Bombs, and they feed people vegan food. And a lot of the time, they go to where there are homeless people or other people that might not have good food security. So they were set up out in front of the library when I was doing this with them, and they'd have food for people, and people would just come and get the food for free. And so I brought things like vitamins and some other supplements, and also socks, because when I was homeless, I always wanted to have clean socks. And it's kind of hard to come by, because even if you wash your socks out at night and then you try to get them to dry, they won't really be dry by morning. So anyway, people loved clean socks as an offering, but also they took everything else that I had as far as vitamins, stuff for pain. Pain is not a disease claim. There are lots of herbs that work for pain, lots of people who suffer from pain, and pain is not considered a disease claim because it's a normal part of life. And so one of the kind of clarifications that was made several years after these rules came out was that things that happen to at least half of the people as a normal part of life are not considered disease claims. So like non-cystic acne is not considered a disease. Hot flashes, not considered a disease. That's just sort of a normal thing that's associated with a particular phase of life, and more than half of the people who go through that phase of life seem to get it. So it's, it's not considered a dysfunction or a disorder or anything like that. It's just, a part of life that isn't necessarily all that pleasant. And pain's the same kind of thing, and acne is the same kind of thing. So, it's pain is throughout our lives. Acne is very frequent in early adolescence. So it's like, not that half the people at any given time have acne, but a lot of people experience it at the particular phase of life that it's associated with. But now if you say arthritis, that's a disease, even though everyone gets it if they live long enough. So, the particular application of the rules can be somewhat capricious, like I said, not necessarily strictly bound to logic, but there it is.
Doesn't all that just show how greedy the whole world is? That's crazy.
Oh, for sure. And I think some of it is about people paying their dues to the power structure, and if you're wealthy enough, you can get away with anything. And some of it is about actual sincere efforts to make things safe and effective and stuff like that. But it all it can be a complicated situation created by a lot of different motives. But yeah, it can be pretty silly some of the time. Hang on a second. Okay. All right. So I wanted to talk about a couple of different herbs today. And one of the herbs is a woodland root crop that is coming up right now. The root is the usual part used, so it's not harvestable right now, but it's visible in the woods right now. And this plant is called Solomon's seal. And hang on just a second. I want to show you. I think I've got something of it to show you. Ah, no. Give me just a second. So this is a plant called Solomon's seal, and it grows in the woods. It's not something you'd likely find. It grows in mature forests for the most part. And it has flowers that bloom on the underside of it. And hang on a second. The flowers look sort of like the symbol of the Star of David, except three of the points, one of the triangles has pointed points and one of the triangles has rounded points. So that's why they named it the Solomon's seal, after King Solomon, who allegedly had a signet ring or a ring with a seal on it that allowed him to control animals and spirits and things like that. And it had some secret symbol on it, which some people consider to be this particular shape. Anyway, it was named after that. And there's another plant, sometimes called false Solomon's seal, or sometimes called Solomon's plume, that looks very similar to it, but has a more of a zigzag stem. And instead of having these bell-shaped, so flowers of Solomon's seal. They're kind of bell-shaped when viewed from the side, and then if you view them from directly underneath them, they look like this star type, six-pointed star type shape. The false Solomon's seal or Solomon's plume, they're all bunched together at the very end of it. So instead of being all along the underside of the stem, they're all at the end of the stem in a little cluster. But you don't harvest it while it's in flower. You harvest it after the berries have ripened, which is months from now. But this is here in the mountains of Eastern North America, from at least up in southern New York down into the mountains in Georgia, possibly further than that in either direction. But that's kind of the area I've roamed around in the woods a fair bit. You can find it in any kind of mature hardwood forest. It's not a super common plant, but if you find the type of environment that it lives in, it's usually there. Because it has berries, it gets distributed by birds, and that's a really good reproductive strategy for woodland plants. So it's sometimes pretty abundant in a local area, but it's very habitat sensitive. It doesn't grow in hard packed soil, clay type soil usually. It likes to grow rather in loose sandy soil, and it doesn't grow in full sun as much. If you plant it in full sun, or mostly full sun, it will grow. And some people do grow it in flower beds and things like that, and it does fine. It's a perennial, but it won't really get started in those places so easily. So often it will start coming up right now, right before the leaves come out on all the trees. And it's out right now. So it comes out and starts gathering its solar energy while the sunlight's still making it to the forest floor, and comes into bloom, and then around the same time that the trees are coming into leaf, and then slowly, very slowly ripens over the course of weeks on what little sunlight makes it to the forest floor. And then when it fades, that's when it's harvested, just like other root crops. And just like other woodland root crops, you want to take a very small, less than 10% of any given stand, and not so as to not over harvest it. And of course, you don't pick it until the berries are already edible to woodland creatures, until they're already ripe. So then that brings us to the part of, what does it do? So Solomon's seal is really not something you find a lot in, I don't really remember ever seeing it much in herb stores and things like that. But it's very popular among herbalists in Eastern North America who come from any kind of a tradition other than just strictly European herbal medicine, because it's got some really good properties. And it's kind of got some fairly vague properties in a lot of ways. So one of the things that it does is that it's a cooling, dampening tonic for the whole body. So if someone's skin is dry, if their joints are dry, if their mouth and their eyes tend to be dry, all sorts of things like that. If they have dry, scant bowel movements, anything like that, any kind of dryness anywhere in the body, it's helpful with. And also, if somebody tends to be too hot, if they're itchy, sweaty, things like that, it's helpful for that. It tends to just kind of cool and moisten the constitution. So it's of the person's body. So it's not having a dramatic, immediate effect, but if it's taken over the course of a month or so, it's pretty noticeable. And if it's taken for longer than that, it becomes even more so. So it's a good tonifying, cooling, moistening thing for the body. And that's one of its main internal uses. The other thing that I have used it for internally and externally is injuries that involve crushing. So crush injuries are exactly what they sound like. Somebody gets, something falls on somebody, or they, get in a car wreck or something, and there's a lot of blunt force. Sometimes muscle, connective tissue, sometimes bone gets broken. And when this happens, there's typically a lot of tissue in the area that's no longer viable and that the body has to reabsorb. And so you have enzymatic processes and immune system processes going on that are breaking down muscle tissue and resulting in a huge dumping of amino acids into the bloodstream. And this can be very hard on the kidneys, and it can actually cause them to shut down. So it's very possible for somebody to get their arm crushed or something like that and completely survive the injury, but then die a little bit later from kidney failure because of the difficulty of their body to process those substances out. It's just can be much more than what the body is normally able to handle. So anytime somebody has an injury that involves crushing, obviously if it's a very severe one, that's not necessarily a job that they're going to come to you for, or that you should try to take on. But if it's the minor sorts of things that people often encounter, where there's like a lot of bruising from, say, a fall or something like that, or automobile accidents are where I usually see this. Occasionally I've had things like the after effects of farming or industrial accidents where people have been hurt by machinery as well. But in those types of situations, increasing fluids is really important. Electrolytes are really important too. There's a lot that goes into it, but Solomon seal can really help to heal those areas up, and it can also help with the process of what the kidneys are trying to do to get rid of these extra substances. Yeah, okay, so you can get the same effect from exercising, as it has just been pointed out to me in the text. So you can get this sort of same effect from exercising. You can also get the same sort of effect from cocaine. And it's, it can be very serious. It's not necessarily a do-it-yourself project, but in its milder manifestations, sometimes just helping the body by helping the kidneys and cooling the body and helping the body to repair damaged tissue is something that Solomon seal is a good. It should never be your whole strategy in this sort of situation, but it can be a helpful adjunct in these types of situations. I knew exercise was bad for you. Exercise can be bad for you. Exercise can be very bad for you. I've known a lot of people who have exercised themselves into the ground, damaged their joints, caused really, exercise can be almost like a form of bulimia for some people, where they're consuming calories and then like obsessively trying to burn them off. And that can be a problem. Or sometimes people just kind of get high on the endorphins. There was a study in, I can't remember what it was in. There was a study a few years back about heart attacks in marathon runners and how, running marathons is actually pretty bad for your heart, which kind of wasn't that surprising a finding when you consider that like the whole origin story of a marathon race was someone running themselves to death to bring the news to the king that the Greeks had a victory over the Persians or whatever it was. So, it's something that people have always understood, that you could damage yourself by exercising. And indeed you can, and it doesn't have to be as dramatic as running yourself to death. It can just be, having too much impact on your joints, having too much burning of stuff for your kidneys to be able to process, and that sort of thing. Yeah, people can get really people can feel really driven about exercising, and sometimes exercising can feel really exhilarating for people, and other people can be like, why are you doing that, you know? uh, so not everyone gets the same rush from endorphins, but some people really do, and you know, really chase that
I've been
rush. And
those
sometimes
people.
you see somebody out jogging and you're like, wow, that looks really miserable, but sometimes, you know, people are really into it.
I'm totally not into it.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I always say that you should only run if someone's chasing you, but you know, walking is good. I mean, I like being physically active. I like walking, I like biking, I like swimming, but anything that's very high impact or very strenuous doesn't feel that good to me. Um, yeah, you know, when I was younger, I used to walk many, many miles in a day. Um, just sometimes just going places and sometimes just enjoying walking. Now, not as much, but not as much as when I was younger, but I still, you know, I can walk several miles and not even have it feel like all that strenuous. It doesn't necessarily feel much more strenuous than being at home and doing housework or something like that. Which I'm very grateful that you know, I'm healthy enough to be able to do that. But yeah, some people really kind of chase that endorphin high, and that can be, it can have a negative impact sometimes. But Solomon seal, the main thing I want you to take from that is that it is sometimes locally abundant but environmentally sensitive woodland root crop that can be used to cool and moisten the body. So think of it as sort of like it's taking the way the forest floor feels and putting that into your body, that coolness and that dampness from the forest floor where it lives, infusing your joints, your veins, your eyes, whatever, your skin. And so it is a remedy that has been used in this part of the world for a long time, and it's a very helpful, even though, you know, again, not really something that I would make any sort of a disease claim for. I really only want to talk about it in terms of structure and function and constitution and things like that. But it is a very helpful medicinal herb and a good one to familiarize yourself with, because it really, it's helpful, but it's powerful, but it's powerful in a gentle way. And I really like that sort of thing. If you haven't noticed by now, I really like herbs that are well tolerated and gentle, but also can make big differences. Is it something that can be taken daily? Yeah, it can be taken daily. It can be taken on an ongoing basis. You know, definitely have people who I have taking compounds that include it that they've taken for, you know, years and years at this point. This other plant is kind of even more vague, but much more abundant. This is Chenopodium. This one is Chenopodium album. There are a few different species of Chenopodium. Actually, there are a whole bunch of different species of Chenopodium. There are a few that you're likely to see growing around here, and this is the main one. So Chenopodium is its main thing is that it's nutritive. It's an edible plant. It has a very similar texture and flavor to spinach. Right now, you can pick it and eat it raw. It's really good. Tastes like springtime. And there's tons of it. It's a very abundant plant. Likes to grow in disturbed ground. It likes to grow in fields. It often grows along with another plant called amaranth that has similar properties. So its Latin name is Chenopodium, Chenopodium. Cheno meaning goose and podium meaning foot. And so another name for it is goosefoot. Sometimes people call it lamb's quarters, or sometimes people call it fat hen. That's more of a British name for it, I guess. Where I'm from, people also called it pigweed, because if you grow corn in a field and then the next year you don't grow anything in the field, a lot of the time this will come up and just as a weed, but it gets 6 or 8 feet tall, and right now it's 1 to 6 inches tall. It's very small this time of year. It's very tender, and you can eat the stem and everything. When it gets bigger, the stem is like woody and tough, and you can just eat the leaves. But different species of Chenopodium have been, well, anyway, to get back to pigweed for a second, that and amaranth will often grow in disturbed ground in this environment, in crop fields that have been left to lay fallow for a year. So where I'm from, what a lot of people would do would be to cut those and feed them to the pigs, because they contain a fair bit of protein and they contain fiber and other things like that. So they're nutritive, they're a source of calories. They probably are, good for the health of the animals and things like that, compared to a lot of what else they get fed. But similar nutritionally to spinach, got a lot of minerals in it and got a lot of fiber in it and some plant proteins. And so and the nice thing is that you can grow a ton of it really easily. So 10,000 years ago, the people who lived in this part of the world grew this plant. And this and sunflower were some of their main crops before corn was introduced into this area. So we know this from looking at the trash piles in their campsites and things like that. But it continued to be a cultivated thing for all these years up to the present time. And people would use it as food and as animal feed, and also as medicine. So it's not something that you would get a big medicinal effect from, but it contains a lot of electrolytes, minerals, calcium, things like that. I've seen one data set that was pretty old, but I haven't seen it replaced by anything else that showed it containing more calcium than any other cultivated vegetables. And here in our region, here in central Kentucky specifically, there's a lot of calcium in the soil. And so, plants that grow in that are able to accumulate quite a bit of it, not only in the soil, but in the water that flows through the soil, that flows through the ground and things like that. So it's a concentrator of calcium. One way that I prepare it is to make well, there are lots of ways I prepare it. My favorite way to prepare it is to chop it up and cook it and make a sort of green, spinachy type dish out of it. That's, just basically cooked leaves, makes them a little more digestible, makes the minerals in them a little more absorbable, and that sort of thing. If I'm using it medicinally, I'll make a tincture of it. I'll take the fresh plant, kind of bruise it up, crush it up a little bit, and make a tincture of it. And then after I've tinctured it, I'll strain the tincture and take the plant material, spread it out to dry, and then burn that to ash. And then I will use a little bit of vinegar to dissolve the ash in, and then add that back to the tincture. And that makes it so that you're getting all the minerals from it, and you're getting all the stuff that's water soluble or alcohol soluble in the first round of extraction, and then burning it to ash just to get the minerals that are left and adding that back in. So that's People sometimes describe that as a spagyric tincture, meaning spagyric, meaning that you separate out the parts or the substances that make it up and then combine them back together. But it's one way to prepare nutritive plant material as medicine. So that's something that I do with it. It's very absorbable in that form. It gets the minerals and things into the body very quickly. But, if you can get somebody to eat it, that's really the best thing. And, much like spinach, it can be added to a salad, eaten raw, or it can be cooked. I've made sort of curried spinach with it, like a stag paneer type of dish with homemade cheese and curried lamb's quarters. So the leaves are very nutritious, very edible, decent tasting and nourishing, and might help people to have trace minerals and other things like that they might not be getting from their diet. Some people have so little fresh food in their diet that even adding something like that in can be really helpful, even though it would be a fairly small amount of it. Besides the leaves, it also produces seeds that can be used a lot like grain. They're not grains, so they're not going to be problematic for people who have intolerances to grains, unless they are for some other reason. But they're not grains. They're the seeds of a flowering plant, but they have a lot of the same carbs and proteins and things that grains would have. And quinoa is actually a commercial grain that is in the same genus. So it's basically like the South American variety, or the South American variation on this same plant theme, since there are different species of this that grow in different places, and they actually kind of interbreed with each other. So there are, hybrids between various different species. And they might be best understood as a complex of species rather than a distinct group of separate species, a group of distinct separate species. So that's a good plant to know about. And if you're wanting to do any sort of spring foraging or whatever, now is the best time of year to get some of it to eat. If you want to harvest it for medicine, I usually harvest it for medicine later on, because you can go out and pick one stem of it and get a grocery bag full of leaves out of it. So it's something that you can get, it can become a very big plant, taller than a person, and with lots of branches and lots of leaves and things like that. And, there can be 100 of them on a 8 by 10 square of ground. And it's not something you have to worry much about over harvesting. Probably not really a native plant, although I'm not completely certain that that's correct. But, like I said, there are different varieties of it in different places, but very difficult to over harvest in any case. It's very prolific, and its seeds can live in the ground for a couple of years if they don't get the right condition to sprout. They can wait and sprout later on. So both so food and medicine, leaves and seeds, and it's just kind of a very nice nourishing herb that provides a lot of nutrients. And there is kind of something of an understanding that feeding it to animals helps them to gain muscle mass. And I'm not sure exactly why that is, so I hesitate to generalize it to people or anything like that, but it does appear to be a sort of thing that people can eat who might be having trouble with other foods and things like that. Not necessarily if it's from sensory issues or not liking the taste or something, but it's something that has that's very digestible as compared to, say, kale, which really, broccolis and kales and a lot of the mustard family vegetables can be rough on a lot of people's stomachs. rough on a lot of people's digestive systems, and this does not tend to be at all. All right, any questions about that plant? You probably have it growing somewhere near your house, so go and check when you get a chance to. Hang on a second here. Questions. This question says, for lamb's quarters, could you powder the leaves and add to a smoothie type drink? Yeah, absolutely. It's very soft. So when you dry it, it powders up very easily without a lot of fibrous material being left behind or anything like that. It does shrink up a lot when it's dried. So it does get a lot smaller when it's dried, but yeah, you could definitely do that with it. And you could also, make it into tablets or capsules or anything like that too, because it does powder very easily. I don't often make powders out of leaves because it's just sort of a dusty process, but it's definitely something you can do, and that works very well with these leaves once they're fully dry. Hang on just a second, I'll be right back. I think displaying foliage in laboratory glass is a good aesthetic for an herbal clinic. So anyway, in keeping with what I keep saying every week, I think it would be really good for any of you that get a chance to spend some time out in the woods this time of year. There's a lot going on. If you live near Lexington, I went to Raven Run Nature Sanctuary last weekend, and it was spectacular. It was really spectacular. Just all the forest floor wildflowers that are blooming right now, all the phlox and all the trilliums and blue-eyed Marys and Solomon seal, and still a few trout lilies here and there, wood poppies, some of the same stuff that we saw a couple weeks ago, but also some different stuff. So, very, very spectacular time to be out in the woods if you have some woods around you. And of course, the weather this time of year is like 30 one day, in the 30s one day, and in the 80s another day. And it's kind of can be hard to plan for the weather when it's doing that, but it pretty much always does this time of year. And in just a couple weeks, well, this course will be wrapping up, of course, but right around that same time is going to be a great time to start planting things if you want to plant stuff. If you live further north, it might be a little bit later, but we're just about past the danger of frost, and lots of things are coming up. Violets are kind of drawing towards the end of their full bloom, so there will be violets all summer long, but if you want to gather any sort of quantity of violets, do that quickly before it's too late. So yeah, it's a really great time to be out there. If you're still gathering plants for your plant collection, which I think everybody should just kind of, do all the time until you know all the plants around you. But anyway, now is a really good time to be out in the woods and out in the fields and things too. Lots of, the diversity and the number of plants that are blooming is still on the upswing. And of course, trees right now are starting to get all leafy, and that will really also come to full leaf in the next couple of weeks as some of the later trees start to put their leaves on. I don't know if anybody saw it, but I did a short walk that I made a live Instagram video of, where I just kind of walked down a walking trail in Lexington and walked out into a field and looked at some of the things that were growing right now there. And I may try and do that. I may try and do it again this week, but I can't promise that I'll get a chance to. So anyway, yes, very good time to be out there. And if you can't, I will keep trying to post content on my various platforms about what's going on out there in the woods. All right, any questions about any of that? Oh, one other thing. I am going to be doing a second year course, and I think what we're going to do is every other Thursday for that. And there will be some readings that you can do on your own, and then we'll talk about them and talk about some other topics as well. So if you're interested in continuing studying with me in the coming year, that's something that I want to make a possibility for people. And that's I think how I'm going to go about that is every other Thursday, and having some particular things to read in between times that I think would be instructional and kind of help to expand your horizons and experiences and things like that. And then once we get further on into that, if you want to come into the clinic and do some stuff here as well, I think that would be a really good learning opportunity as well. All right. So, any other questions for this week? All right. Well, thank you for coming, and you're very welcome. And I will talk to you soon. See you soon.
Hey, Andrew.
Yeah.
When are you planning on doing your weekend intensive? Is that next weekend?
Yeah, next weekend.
What date is that?
What date is that?
So not this weekend, but the next.
Yes. So yeah, so that'd be the 28th and 29th.
Okay. Just wanted to get it on my calendar.
Yeah.
Okay, awesome. Thank you. Sorry about that.
All right. Talk to you soon.
Good night.
Good night. Thank you so much.
Bye.
Thanks.